Right, so I want to start this session today, perhaps not in the usual way.
The one I've just not come to.
Yeah, she's telling everyone to log on to it. I'm not going to log into it.
Oh,
I'm gonna listen.
Sorry.
Put themselves on mute if you're not speaking, please.
Okay, I'll start again. So I wanted to start this session today, not in the usual way, but I have something to say before we get onto the packed agenda. You may not know me, and that's fine. It's not important at this moment in time. But I would like to say from a really human place, thank you. Thank you for being there. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for caring, not just for those in our care, but for each other. I know I wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for our teams and the connections that I have around me. The experiences of the past year have left an impact on me and everyone I know. Concerns for family, friends, colleagues. The challenges of getting a food run in, queuing outside the supermarket after a night shift. No doctor's appointments, no dentist appointments. We faced all kinds of other personal and organisational challenges. And yet AP staff worked through the pandemic at keeping our APs operating. At times, as you know, this was in the face of outbreaks and lockdowns, where others were largely working from home. So let's use this event today to really celebrate the dedication of AP staff. And yes, we are still here. So truly thank you for supporting one another and for pulling together. It's a privilege to be here this morning. Again, thank you for giving up your time to be here for the next 2 hours. So a bit about me. I'm Bev Larock. I'm based in Liverpool, raised in Stafford House approved premises, and now working on equality, diversity and inclusion with all of the North West approved premises. I'm a mother, a sister, an aunt, and your colleague who will also be chairing today's event. So what is this event about? Well, as we have passed 12 months since the start of the pandemic, Insights Group have organised a series of virtual learning events aimed at providing staff with a chance to reflect on how we have adapted and coped over the past year, to celebrate our successes, share ideas, and think about what this means for our future. We are hoping to have a number of events on different topics for both prison and probation staff, including our partners, and with some academic input. Some events will be an open invite, others will be targeted towards certain groups of staff. And on that note, I've already mentioned what a packed agenda we have today. But before we start, can I just mention some housekeeping pointers? Firstly, attendees can either have their cameras on or off, but please make sure you're on mute unless asking a question. Captions are available, but speech recognition is not always accurate. When asking a question, either on the chat bar or via the telephone, please give your name and where you work so that all participants are aware of who is asking the question. Any questions or queries that you have, we will do our best to answer. And on that note, can I just say that I know there are some pressing issues we could use this time for in this session, but we will not be addressing issues around pay or banding or rotas. Today's meeting is about celebrating the work we have continued to do to such a superior standard over the past year. Any questions that we don't get to answer today, we will put in a Q&A communication following the event. Also, can I remind everybody on Teams to use the emoji function for feedback, unless asking a specific question. The event will run till approximately 11:45, when there will be a chance for your questions to be answered. We will also have a comfort break for 5 minutes at 11 o'clock. But for those of you that can battle through, we've got 2 beautiful poems that will be played during the break by Jenna Beardsworth and Andrew Hart. We've a range of colleagues contributing to today's event from all over the country, and I'm sure everyone has seen the agenda for today. I hope everybody enjoys the event. And so I did have 10 minutes to talk, but I've blasted my way through that. So I won't take up any more of your time. Instead, can I introduce everyone to Joe Oliver, Head of Operations, and Dan Stretton from the National Approved Premises team. Thank you.
Thanks, Beth. Dan and I have got a few minutes to talk to you all. I'm not quite sure how I follow Bev's introduction, which was amazing, and probably, you know, obviously we've only got 5 minutes between us, so I'll try and get through what I wanted to say. But I suppose this was my time to kind of say how the last 12-14 months have been from my perspective, and I was reflecting kind of overnight on when it all started, really. And it started for me, I remember hearing over Christmas 2019 about this new virus in China that was emerging, and then I was asked to go to my first COVID meeting on the 11th of February, and there were a funny few weeks then where it was kind of, it felt a bit like a bit of a phony war, where it was coming and it was in Italy and it was in China, and it, you know, there was still a kind of sense of, well, this isn't going to be an issue for me. I apologise for my BBC alert then. I think it's to do with Dominic Cummings giving evidence to the Select Committee, but apologies for that. And Lisa Mackenzie and I were kind of battling through those early weeks, trying to understand what it was that we needed to do. And I was reflecting on this over the last few days, and there was so much that we didn't know, in fact everything, and that was the same for the government and for Public Health England. Nobody really knew what to expect. We had business continuity plans that we put in place for other reasons, but you know, kind of no sense at that stage that that was going to be enough. And the big concern was that we would lose people. I know that we have lost people, thankfully not, you know, only a limited number of our staff, Joyce at Ellison House and Christina at Great Home, and sadly one resident who died within 28 days, but we've done amazingly. But our big concern, and my big concern at the beginning, was that we would lose a lot of people because our residents don't tend to look after themselves very well a lot of the time, and that their general health was not great to start with. And if they were hit with COVID, how would they manage, and how would our staff manage? I wanted to acknowledge as well that whilst we've done, you know, it's been amazing that we've lost so few people, we have also had a number of people who've been extremely ill and are still recovering, and I wanted to kind of, you know, kind of acknowledge that. I was also thinking about what was hard and kind of everything, the pace and the demands on from a kind of like getting everything set up perspective, and the sense that it was never enough, that all of you were all out there in the APs dealing with residents on a daily basis, and it felt from my perspective that I could never do enough to put things in place to make sure that you were safe and that residents were safe. But on the back of that, what was really brilliant was the way that all of you and a vast majority of our residents just kind of got on with it, took on board all the new things you were being asked to do, and put everything in place and did a really fabulous job. So that is, you know, one of the real bright spots of what's been a really difficult and trying time. Just to say, kind of personally for me, both my mums, who live across the road from me, and my husband were CEV. I then got classified in the second round of same people who were CEV, got reclassified as CEV because I'm overweight and I've got asthma. So I was really lucky, I think, that I was able to continue to do my job in a very full way from, you know, whilst kind of, and I know that we've had some colleagues that haven't been able to do that because of their roles, and that they very much want to get back to work, and hopefully they are doing. I think that's just, for me, I think it's 31 years in a few weeks' time since I qualified, and I don't think I've ever lived through a time in my entire career like this last year, and it's it's still had an impact. You know, it still has impacts on us all. I think those things that we don't really notice. One of the things for me, and you might think this is a bit ridiculous, I think it's a bit ridiculous, but if I finish work before 6 o'clock, I feel like I'm skiving, because I've got so used to working that kind of 9-10 hour day through COVID to try and keep everything going, and keeping the information flowing to you and working out what we need to do and how we need to manage it. That's kind of been a kind of impact for me. Sorry, I've probably taken our 5 minutes, Dan, and I'll hand over to you now to carry on, if that's okay.
Thanks, Jo. Good morning, everyone. I'm Daniel Stretton and I work as the Programme Manager in the National Approved Premises team, and I just wanted to briefly discuss some of the work that our team completed in supporting you delivering the great service that you provide and keeping the approved premises open and operational throughout the pandemic. So the National AP team is a small geographically dispersed team of 4, and prior to the pandemic our roles involved lots of regular travel to various meetings all around the country, although this changed in March 2020 when we suddenly needed to focus our efforts on supporting the AP with the rapidly developing situation with COVID-19. So our business as usual work was essentially paused, and like many others, we also needed to adapt to a new way of working online. We're meeting regularly on Skype and later on Teams, and that enabled us to respond rapidly as it became apparent very quickly there'd need to be some resources and changes to the working practices so that we could support the frontline staff in coping with the demands that the pandemic was placing on you. So part of our work in the national team involved coordinating and collating information from AP linked to COVID-19, and whilst that required additional work from AP managers and staff, it was really important in supporting and informing not only the organisation's strategic response to the pandemic, but also contributing towards the health modelling and the wider government response. We have and continue to work really closely with other colleagues, including health and safety, health justice and trade unions, to develop and review the exceptional delivery model, the standard operating procedures and other guidance to keep AP operational, whilst also supporting the incredible work that you do with practical solutions and the provision of resources such as lunch provision for residents, TVs for residents' bedrooms, and supporting the work to get PPE into the hands of AP staff. And I know others on this call today are going to talk about that. It also became apparent within the first few weeks of the pandemic that the volume of information and documents had grown exponentially. So in addition to those regular communications which were sent out to heads of public protection and area managers, we also developed the Approved Premises COVID-19 Resources OneNote, and that was made available and accessible for all staff working in approved premises to enable easy access to the latest and most up-to-date information, and that continues to be updated and managed still and will continue to be for the foreseeable. So that is a very brief whistle-stop overview of the work that the national team has done during the last sort of 12-14 months. And I thank you very much for your time this morning, and I'll hand back to Bev. Thank you.
Thank you, both Jo and Dan. So next on the agenda, we have Simon Jeffrey, Mike Rayfield, Natalie Rose and James Harris.
Thanks very much, Bev. Morning, everybody. I'm Simon Jeffrey. For those who don't know me, Simon Jeffrey, Head of Estates for Probation. And I'll just give you a few thoughts, opening thoughts, really, in terms of why we never want to close the building again. And Mike and Natalie and James will just follow on with a few thoughts, very much from an operational experience perspective. Why do we never want to close the building again? Well, I think a year ago, just following on from Jo was saying, I think I never thought I'd become more of an expert, if I can use that term, than I am now in terms of things like water and ventilation and a number of other things that I and others who are in this call will have got involved in to help the business keep going and move forward. So I think we've learned a lot and done a lot in that time, and we've developed a load of stuff. We've got a lot of products and things available to us, and that's including around closing and opening buildings. So predominantly, you'll remember, there was a decision to close a particular group of APs mainly in London. History tells us now that that may or may not have been the right thing to do. Certainly from a practical point of view, you thought, well, how difficult can it be to close a building and then reopen it? I think the closing bit was fine. We identified a lot of things we needed to think about, whether it was facilities management, or operational factors, of course, and obviously a number of issues in terms of relating to the service users, the residents themselves, in terms of how we manage and work with them through what is a change, isn't it? I think when it came to reopening them, none of us foresaw how long that was going to take and some of the issues that we would have to face. And I just want to pick out one or two things within that. I think one of the different factors here that we hadn't experienced before was water. And that was all around water testing and Legionella, which is incredibly important, of course. But I think what it taught us in terms of reopening a building, that there are activities that are just not in our control. And when I say our control, I'm including our colleagues in MOJ Estates here. So not just my control or Mike or Natalie and James and everybody else on this call. There's a number of things that aren't in control of MOJ Estates, and we're reliant on external agencies, laboratories, to sort of help us to get those results through in a timely way at a time when everybody wants across the country wants water test results quickly. So some things that we hadn't really foreseen in terms of implication, and that had a knock-on effect. I think the other key thing for me, and the guys might pick up on this as we go through, is just in terms of other items that we need to think about. We need to think about so many things purely from the state's perspective. Of course, there's a number of things we need to think about, making sure key items that, dare I mention, front doors that need to be in place and secure, but other factors in terms of the building as well, ready. And every AP is different in its context. Every AP building is different, and making sure those required jobs are done so that we can start. And what's essential and what's not so essential. And sometimes that can be a bit of a grey line, can't it? So I think those were the key points for me. I think the other key factor, just to put into the mix, and I only sort of consciously reflected on this morning, was the fact that we have closed and opened buildings before. It's not a new thing, but let's face it, Public Health England were particularly interested in our plans around reopening, and they gave us a lot of scrutiny in terms of our plans to make sure that they felt comfortable. And I think there's a challenge there, rightly or wrongly, in terms of proportionality, and I'm not questioning that at all. I'm just saying that I think it was a new experience for us in terms of the level of assurance we needed to be able to provide in terms of opening a building. And I think a lot of that is for the good. It's not a criticism, a lot of it is for the good, but it's readjusted my vision, if you like, in terms of just turning up and saying, yeah, the power's on, the water's working, let's open. Actually, that whole basket of things we need to think about in terms of reopening an AP is significant, and we're right to think about them and plan for those. And we need to, if we are ever in a situation, whether it's a pandemic related or any other instance related, where we close and open an AP after a period of time, which will happen, we've got a lot of things now that we can build on and use for that. Anyway, a danger that, as always, I will talk too much. So I will pass over to Mike, who can start the story about what it really was like to live it on the ground. Mike, can I hand over to you?
You can, but I think it's James first.
Oh, James is going first, is he? You've shifted the order. Go on, James.
Thank you, Simon. Simon, you could never say too much. My name's James Harris, manager of Ellison House Approved Premises down in Southwark in London, formerly manager of Kew Approved Premises down in Richmond. Kew in Richmond, so much more than a botanical gardens. Also home to Kew Approved Premises, a 23-bed unit in an old police station. Originally a bail hostel since 1978. Caused a lot of local feeling when it first opened. The local council and residents supported the bail hostel ultimately, saying that although a very wealthy area, they had a social responsibility to support the opening. Now, fast forward 41 years and the pandemic hits, and all the residents need to move on in line with a number of AP closures throughout London. First and foremost, it has to be acknowledged that the staff at the APs did an absolutely fantastic job of managing the move on of residents, a real skill in the effective communication needed to persuade. As an example, a young SGO case originally from the other side of London, Tower Hamlets, that he's moving to Reading, and he's moving quick within 24 hours the next morning. Staff were then having to move approved premises themselves, some, as an example, from Kew to the other side of London to Stratford, Tulse Hill, Camden, different commutes, new colleagues, new residents, all in very early stages of a pandemic when PPE stocks and procedures were still being established. I think it's testament to the staff, particularly residential workers, who had no option to work from home for any of these shifts, that the sickness levels remained so low, the morale remained to ensure that our residents were getting the care and attention they needed. In preparing this presentation, I had some feedback from Rex Ogwall, who's a PSO at Ellison House, where I'm currently managing. He was redeployed to an AP in Catford. He identified that there were issues. Some APs ended up being overstaffed, and that led to concerns around social distancing. And we had prison staff coming in to the AP to support units. But again, in hindsight, this could have been transporting COVID between sites. The closures were a panic decision, perhaps, but ultimately you make the right decisions at the time based on the information available and making reasonable predictions about the impact in terms of staff availability, etc. Recall rates remain low throughout the pandemic. Residents largely engage well with the requirements of not leaving the AP unless for designated reasons. I think it's important to flag two things, really: the significant importance of effective communication at all levels, with a total focus on supporting frontline staff and residents. The releases from prison of high and very high risk of harm residents didn't stop. There was no putting problematic standard determinate cases on the back burner, and those on a 3-man unlock on the Wednesday were still coming to the AP on the Thursday in the grip of the pandemic. The risk issues did not dissipate. Individuals, supportive environments from peer managers, area managers such as Andrew Wisdom in my case, and strong leadership. Diane Allabar, London Head of Public Protection for APs, a leader that ever should there be a pub quiz that focused on approved premises policy, she'd no doubt take home the prize money. And Suzanne Dawson, I should mention from a personal perspective, who in terms of her ability to get APs opened up again is really second to none. The reopenings were not straightforward for a variety of reasons. And if I and others across the APs never hear the words water testing again, I'd be quite thankful for that. But however, it's great that there doesn't feel like there's a huge gap between the small cogs and the big cogs in APs. I can email one of the national team and it's straightforward and friendly. You get responses and things get done. The chain of command is there, but it's approachable on all levels. I think that's really encouraging for a new department. So thanks to our leaders, both local and nationally, but most importantly, thank you to the residential workers and PSOs, the relief staff, the cleaners, the security staff, who carried on day after day, coming in for their shifts in the most difficult of circumstances to get the day-to-day business done. It's not been done before on that scale. Hopefully it won't be done again. We talk a lot about hidden heroes, but we often forget the FM maintenance staff tirelessly coming out 24 hours a day to ensure that buildings are in good condition and that the basics are being done, as well as making sure that they are looking after themselves COVID-wise. We're soon actually to close down our current AP. Perhaps that's for another call, but we're moving from Ellison House up the road to a new AP, which is going to be named after the very sad COVID-related death of our cleaner, Joyce Meggie. And I think it's right to mention her in tribute on this call because of the amazing work that she did at the AP. You could describe her job role as a cook, but she had a level of engagement with residents, which was, again, second to none. Fantastic. So thank you very much. Anyone interested in visiting an AP, colleagues across the CJS, please get in touch and we can try and sort something out in the near future. And apologies if I've overrun. Thank you.
Thanks, James. So, Mike, I think I've got it right now. Is it over to you?
It is indeed, yes. Thank you, James. That was great. It didn't matter if you overrun because it cuts me down a bit, which is great. But that was a really good overview. So thank you for that. And really want to add to what you said about our staff. We couldn't have got through any of this without our staff team. They've been amazing throughout the whole thing and continue to be so on a daily basis. So I was asked to talk to this event about why we should never close an AP, and I think it's more about hindsight than insight, but it's yeah, with hindsight's a wonderful thing. So my immediate response to that question was we shouldn't close an AP because it's too bloody difficult to reopen. So, but we had to do it. But our first experience of closed APs were not in our own division. We got called upon when London had to close their APs, as James has spoken about. So in the South East and Eastern Division, we worked with our friends in London to place quite a number of residents across our area in a very short space of time. So we had to find a number of beds at very short notice. And then I remember sending out emails to all of our managers in the division, and I did title those emails "London's Calling to the Faraway Towns." And for those that remember The Clash, you might recall what that song was actually about, where Joe Strummer actually conjures up images of impending doom. But yeah, I don't know if some of the people on here are old enough to remember that. I can see that. But we did it, and it was testament again to our AP managers, our staff. People were working tirelessly, you know, people were still working at 10 o'clock at night and 6 o'clock in the morning, you know, and not just those on shift, but those sitting at home working and finding beds and talking to each other and getting it sorted. So it was a challenge for all of us, for our staff, but not least, it was a challenge for our residents who all of a sudden got pulled out of an AP in London somewhere and sent to places like, you know, Bedfordshire or Northampton or Kent or Surrey. Yeah, and they didn't really have a lot of choice where they went, but we got there and they got there, so it was good for them ultimately. So that was our kind of first experience. When London called, we responded, and it didn't end up in no doom. We got there, we got through it. So and then our next experience of closure was actually with one of our own APs, which is Luton AP. But the story about Luton is that it never actually closed because of COVID. It was already closed. But of course, because it was closed when COVID hit, when we tried to reopen it quite a long way later, we got caught up in all of the COVID rules and the COVID bureaucratic processes. So we couldn't just reopen our doors. We had to deal with the things like water. Everybody's mentioning water because it was a bit of it was a funny one really, because if you go too early with your water testing and then don't open, you've got to do it all again. So yeah, it was a bit repetitive, but we got there. And there are many dependencies. Because in Luton in particular, Natalie will talk about this in a minute, but it was about recruitment, it was about vetting. It's about, the building's empty, but you still got to manage an empty building. So that in itself is a challenge as well. So you've got to manage staff training, number of FM issues, and we're all eternally grateful to all our FM colleagues who were fantastic throughout and really helpful. They sometimes get a bad press, but they actually do a fantastic job. So we're really grateful for what they did as well. And then we had to, you know, the bureaucratic process I go on about, but it was a bit, you know, we got caught up in that. So you had to follow advice from government advice, PHE advice, health and safety advice. And then we were getting messages from gold, silver, bronze. I think there are others as well. I was part of the plastic team, I think, but you know, it was a challenge because there were so many messages and so many dependencies and so many things that we had to do that we'd never thought of. And I thought, well, we're having to do all these things to reopen Luton, but we're not doing all these things in the APs that are already open. So what is that about? So it must be really safe now, I hope. Yeah, and alongside all of that, of course, then you've still got to manage the demand and the beds and the people who do start arriving. So, you know, and we've got new staff, so you've got to think about the staff and their morale, because they've not been at work before. They've been at work in an empty building or they've been deployed elsewhere, so they're all coming back as well. So that was a bit of a challenge, but again, we got there. So that was a little run through, really. It's been a bit of a year, hasn't it? You know, and I love the opening from Bev today. I think that was really poignant and well said. Thank you, Bev. But we, you know, Sorry, I've lost my way here. So the final question, should we have closed at AP? Well, I guess as an absolute last resort, we didn't have much choice really. We had to close APs. In London, they had to close APs. We've avoided closing others in our own division, come close to it at times, but from the experience of having to close and then having to reopen, we did manage it. So I would say going forward, if we can reduce capacity, use the word suspend rather than close, I think that's much easier to manage. It's a bit semantic, but it was important. But we couldn't have done any of this without a lot of the people who are on this call and the staff that were working throughout that time and continue to do so. So massive heartfelt thank you to all of those people. It was great. And I'm now going to hand over to Natalie, who will talk about her experience as the Luton AP manager. Thank you, Natalie.
Thanks, Mike. You ready to come in, Natalie? I would just add, Mike, that we do now have a site suspension process which bans the word closure. So forthwith, we will never use the word ever again.
Perfect.
Natalie, do come in.
Hi, everyone. I'm Natalie Rose, manager for Luton Approved Premises. So for me, well, I only started in November 2019 as a completely new manager, new to APs altogether. And we were already in the process of planning for closure, not due to COVID, COVID hadn't had the outbreak at that time, but more so because of planned expansion works. So luckily, I must say for us, we had already dispersed residents. And at the time, our staff team was made up heavily of agency staff. So when we did have to close, which coincided with, COVID, we didn't have a lot of staff to redeploy. And instead, the staff that we did have were able to support our other local APs in a really helpful way and enable them to maintain being open. So for me, being closed was more of an opportunity for us to be able to press a reset button and really think about our processes, how we do things. Recruitment was high on the agenda because, as I said, prior to closing, we had a team that was made up mostly of agency staff. So we were really able to focus on recruiting, and it wasn't just about putting campaigns out, but thinking more about how we recruit, how we reach people who have the right skills and values that we need in the organisation, looking at diversity in terms of the questions we ask. So really being able to focus on some key areas. Also for the experienced staff that we did have in the AP who had the opportunity to work in other APs, I feel like it was a much more comfortable environment for them to upskill and develop. Instead of having that expectation of should know it all, they were able to be the new person in a whole different environment, and I felt that they were more open then to learning, being more adaptable to change. And so that worked in our benefit. The biggest challenge, I think, was with reopening was having a staff team with no experience. So we basically had residential workers. I'm a new manager, and then we've got residential workers who don't come from a criminal justice background, and that was the biggest challenge: of how do we open safely? There's a lot of pressure. There was a lot of pressure coming to open, but so not just with COVID in mind of how to manage the AP and be COVID ready and safe, but also with the lack of experience within the staff team, how to open in a safe way, which was really, really challenging. And that's when I really saw the benefits of teamwork and the way that all the APs across the whole division, and I believe London as well, made their staff available to Luton, so made their experienced staff available to support us, especially with key shifts such as the weekends and the nights, to have an additional experienced member of staff there to support our new staff to develop. It was also really nice for other APs to take in our new staff as we were recruiting them to offer training. It provided them with valuable experience, but not just that, ideas as well. So for Luton, when we came to devise our processes, there was loads of ideas, and we were taking ideas mostly from Peterborough and Northampton, and and then we've got to a stage now where we've been open for about, I think it's 6 months, properly open with residents, and we're starting to adapt all these processes to Luton's way of doing things now, which has been nice. So, so whilst closing an AP isn't easy and reopening definitely isn't easy, I do think there's positives that can come from having to close, and just kind of, it gives you an opportunity to really see the team that you work within, and the fact that you are supported, because the role as an AP manager is quite isolating, and you do feel a lot of the time like you're kind of managing everything on your own. But so for me, it's just seeing how much support I really do have within the team.
Thanks, Natalie.
That's it.
I was going to say thanks, Natalie, and you did it. Well done. Hit the ground running, I think, is fair to say.
Sink or swim.
Well, you definitely sweat. Well done. Bev, I'm conscious we're going over time, but I thought hopefully some real different insights in terms of experiences the guys are given there on the ground, challenging and positive. So definitely things we can take forward. But Bev, I'll be quiet now because I'm conscious we need to move on. Is that okay?
Brilliant. Thank you so much to everybody that spoke then. Right, we are over time, so let's see. Next up, we have Andrea Manson, Sarbjeet Shankar and Catherine Dent talking about PPE. That's okay, I can hand over.
Thanks, Bev. I'm going to bring in Catherine and Sarbjeet first to give them their perspective, and then I'll finish off. I've got a handful of slides I just wanted to share with colleagues. So, Catherine, would you like to kick us off if that's okay?
Hi everyone. I'm Kat. I work at Canadian Avenue, and I'm going to give my experience on the challenges of PPE. I've worked through the whole pandemic at the AP. So we have faced challenges ensuring we've had enough PPE. At the start of the pandemic, PPE was limited due to shortage in supply, not just at Canadian Avenue, but nationally. It was hard to get any PPE. The little bit that we had come through the doors was used sparingly. We had masks and stuff. Like, I'm just speaking to some of our colleagues here, and at the beginning, staff had to justify why they wanted to use a mask whilst at work. And it seemed that the residents were more thought of with the PPE. Because of the shortage and how limited it was. Sorry. Yeah, so our company, myself and our colleagues were coming onto site. We were putting our families at risk and ourselves, and the staff shortages of the actual PPE was limited. So I've written this down. I'm getting confused here. So basically, when we did run out of PPE, we as staff, we would go around the shops. We was asked to go and look for PPE, see if we could get hand sanitizer, if we could pick up face masks and anti-bac wipes. So that we had enough. This is to overcome the challenges. Sorry. We also borrowed from other APs. If we'd run short of PPE, we'd call into other APs and they would either send some over by cab. And our manager would also go to Pentonville Prison, and he would collect PPE from the prison, because I believe that it was all distributed in one big order to the prison, and then it took its time to come through. Speaking to our admin on orders, She was saying that she did put orders in good time, but as deliveries were sent to Pentonville, they were distributed out not in good time. And she said that when she was ordering, the process of the ordering changed a lot, which she found challenging and quite confusing with the whole process order, which would delay PPE coming in through to the office. With regards to residents and PPE, once the ordering picked up and we was having regular deliveries of PPE, then it became more available to staff and to residents, which in the height of the pandemic at the beginning, it wasn't, when we needed it as much. But now that the risk is being reduced and, you know, people are having their jabs and, you know, obviously we're still keeping with within the government guidelines. I've lost where I'm going. So I was saying with regards to residents, when they arrive, we always ensure that they have a welcome pack in their room. So when they arrive on site, we would place face masks and hand sanitizer with their welcome packs, so that, you know, they had the use of the PPE when they arrived. So all in all, PPE hasn't been that bad. At the beginning it was, but I haven't really experienced any experiences with lack of PPE. It's available every time I come into work. It was just at the beginning it wasn't too good, and all staff have been ensured and pulled together to ensure that we've created a safe working environment for everybody. And as I said, PPE is now delivered often. We're fully stocked, if not overstocked at the moment. We've got boxes of it everywhere. We couldn't get enough of it. So that's my experience on PPE. I'm sorry if I got a bit stuck in the middle. I'm not very good at group speaking, but I'm glad that I've put over what I wanted to say. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Kat. And I'm going to go over to Charlotte now to see if you could put your presentation up. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Sarb Shankar. I'm the temporary business manager for the Midlands APs, working for the time. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about our journey in the Midlands in regards to setting up and embedding the supply chain, comparing the situation at the beginning of the pandemic to at this point in time now. And I think it's pretty fair to say, I think, sort of going off the back of what Catherine's been saying as well, it's a pretty hectic time at the very beginning due to the reactive nature of getting the PPE into our APs and, really trying to embed the supply chain in as quickly as we could. I do apologise. Sorry, iPad. So it's quite hectic and, trying to embed the supply chain in as quickly as we could. So for the Midlands, we've got 3 PPE hubs that supply to 20 of our APs and, over quite a large geographical area. And again, it's quite a similar experience in terms of our other sort of hub areas, the larger hub areas. And overall, we have a pretty good relationship with the HubSpots in the Midlands. Initially we had to explain how the APs work and, the reasons for such high demand. As you know, they had their own supply issues. They were supplying PPE to the prison estate as well. And I can, sort of wanting to say that the hubs were and still are very responsive to our needs, as supplies dictate for them. And again, sort of just touching on the supply issues in terms of, the hubs, one that sort of comes to mind quite quickly is the vitamin D supplies. They're like gold dust, aren't they? Really, really hard to get hold of. And also at times, they had sort of limited staff resource due to COVID-19. So, the process of, the pub supplying us and just be able to pick it up took longer than usual. And, this is where we had to kind of get a little bit more creative and move, stock around internally. And sort of touching upon couriers now. So in terms of the Midlands, we'd already started the process of setting up our local couriers, although we didn't have a service in place at that time. And that was quite difficult because we also didn't have a national contract in place either. So, here we were at the very beginning, especially I remember we were having to
No. Is that Sarb's internet gone?
they were
So
Is it Sarb? Can you see?
cut
Hey,
off
Victoria.
there.
Oh, she's back. She's back.
Oh, you're back. You're back. We lost you for a sec, so.
I don't know what happened there. It's never happened before. Yeah, so I was just talking about CLC colleagues. So they, really stepped in at the very beginning, again, massive challenge over such a large geographical area, just trying to get the deliveries, out as quickly as we could. Then the national contract came into place. And, again, sort of speaking to other HOP areas, the consensus is we had a few issues with them sort of at the beginning and throughout. But I guess in the Midlands, we were quite lucky because we'd already had our local courier set up. So, we have our courier set up, that works quite well for us and it still is. But at the beginning, again, it was about relying on, assisting in getting the PPE, getting it out to APs. And I'm talking about AP managers, operational staff. One of our finance officers in the Midlands, she's been fantastic. She's really helped out a lot just to get that PPE out. And again, similar experience for some of the HOP areas as well. I know a few of my BM colleagues, diary managers, they're travelling to the hubs themselves to pick up the PPE. And one of my BM colleagues, it's quite funny actually when she told me, she's turned a garage into a bit of a PPE distribution hub. And, I think it just really shows the level of commitment and resilience, that our colleagues have in terms of ensuring the safety of our colleagues, residents, and, ultimately assisting in ensuring that we're remaining operational at all times. So in terms of the situation now, collectively, we've all ensured that we've been stocked with enough PPE throughout the pandemic and quite quickly moving from a reactive position to a proactive position. And I can happily say, and again, I speak for the HOP areas as well, that in the Midlands, we're in a position, and again, like Catherine touched on earlier, we're in a position where actually we're falling over ourselves in terms of the PPE that we do have at the APs. And again, that's down to, the PPE that comes out with DLFT tests. And for me, I'm not having any more nightmares about PPE, so that's a win-win for me. And I think our situation is great. We've got a lot of PPE. We're doing what we should be doing. We're keeping everybody safe, keeping operational, and just overcoming the challenges that we face at the very beginning. And it's a very different situation now. And I guess just to finish off, just a huge shout out to everybody who's kind of really helped get the process up and running and keeping everyone safe in the Midlands and obviously all the other HOP areas as well. So I'm just going to pass over to Andrew Manson now.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Abs. So for those that don't know me, I'm Andrea Manson and I have the national lead for health and safety across the NPS. I'm part of an HMPPS health and safety team which works very close in hand with prisons, and I do have a few slides to share with you, but I just want to thank both Kat and Sarb there. I totally recognise the position that they have been in throughout the pandemic, and can echo some of the concerns that we had early days. And just to kind of to share back, I recall sitting, and I'm not sure if my colleague Lisa Mackenzie's on today with the HOP from the Northwest, but I recall sitting in a conference room in Mitre House in London with a pen and a bit of paper saying, so this bloody thing then, this COVID stuff, do you think we need to put some things in place, and what should we be doing? And we were talking about things like, and this was probably early February before everything kicked off, and we were talking about things like delivering meals to rooms for residents who were poorly, and oh, we better give them some gloves and stuff like that. So I'm going to share my slides and just quickly talk to them if that's okay, just so that colleagues are aware of what the position was and where I think we are now. So yeah, hoping everybody can see these. So in the beginning, and I've just referred to back in February, we had no idea what PPE was needed at all. I remember the Prime Minister, we talked about happy birthday, washing your hands as you were singing. And at that point, there was absolutely no inclination of what might be needed, where we would get it from, what kind we needed, and who should actually wear it. And part of that PPE process was including hand sanitizer and alcohol wipes, which technically the hygiene products, but we included that as a PPE requisite, and we tried so much to get logistics chain. We could get it, but we were having to buy it off shelves. We couldn't get it from Banner, and as part of the process, we managed to get included in the prison HMPPS supplies coming from Branston. So that was a bit of a goal that we hit. That was good. So moving on, the government guidance, we moved into the pandemic. We started to put risk assessments into place. You'll all recall the wonderful generic risk assessments that my team pulled together and we started using across all areas of NPS. We started to link in with public health advice from PHE and PHW. We have colleagues in HMPPS who work in public health as well. They too were providing advice. What were the health and safety risks? At that point, you know, for a PPE perspective, what did we need to wear? And I remember high risk, we talked about first aid and CPR, and working with people who were in rooms with flu type symptoms, because that's all the knowledge that we had. So we looked again at the demand and availability of some of the PPE. We were trying to get it through Banner. I recall going to Tesco's, you know, and the logistics of getting it out there. We don't naturally have a good logistics chain within NPS, and I think that's something is a lesson learned. In prisons, they have positive pushes on vans from Branston out to all the prisons every week, so they have something set up we didn't have, so we needed to tap into that. And that was a bit of an own goal for us. As the pandemic progressed, we get better understanding of the transmission routes. We know it's viral, we know it's airborne in an aerosol format. So it's began to give us a better knowledge of what PPE is required, and we started to get better supplies of PPE coming in. So we knew that we could tap into some of the resources coming in at Branston. And by this time, the Department of Health and Social Care were starting to work with other government departments, and we started to review our SOPs and risk assessments in line with some of the evidence that was coming out from COBRA meetings. And I'll just add, at this time, this was probably April at the height of the pandemic when the first wave hit. And if you, from a personal perspective, and I'll be quite open and honest here, in the role that I was in, working sort of really long days and being torn in so many directions. So we were under demand. Everybody was screaming at us, screaming at me, basically, where are we going to get PPE? Where are we going to get hygiene products? How are we getting them? It was a very stressful time for me and for all colleagues involved. And on the other hand, I recognised, and Kat said a comment earlier around, you know, they were working in APs, they were taking it home, the fears were there.
It was sent out last week.
And I think basically we just didn't know where we were going, didn't seem to have any format. And yes, I'll admit I had a few tears over it, and also because I had friends and colleagues working in NHS, knowing how difficult they were needing PPE and seeing it on the news, and I think everybody was in the same boat. So bit of another own goal there. We just didn't know where to go, what to do. But moving on, I'm going to turn it around positive now. We've had the first wave, we've had the second wave, and hopefully, fingers crossed, but we know potentially there might be a third wave. Where are we now? We are linked in directly to the HMPPS demand model. So we attend, me and senior managers, every Thursday morning at 8:30. There's a meeting. What's coming on board? What are we needing to open up? Looking at footfall. Oral fluid drug testing's come back online by exception, as has alcohol testing. What PPE do we need? Lateral flow testing. So we now know all the tasks, what PPE is required and how much we're going to need. And that's based on some of the WHO and the SAGE information. And if I say to you that we're currently planning September, October supplies now, that'll give you an idea how far in advance that works. That DHSC supply chain is guaranteed for us as a government agency and of the right specification. So you will know in early days, people were procuring PPE potentially from a non-certified route that might not have been the right specification, and that was something else we had to balance on. But we now know that we have regular supply into the APs via the PPE hubs, which is the best known route to get it there. So that's really good, and I'm not aware of any shortages, and I think colleagues have alluded to a good supply being in place. So we'll take that one as a goal that way. So basically, and the purpose of these little slides, we didn't know where we were. The goalposts kept moving. Things kept changing as the advice came in. Scientific advice changed, what we should do change. And so as those goalposts moved, we reacted as much as we could, and hopefully now we're on the right lines and we basically have a supply there to ensure that everybody has sufficient supply of the right PP at the right time. And I just want to thank all colleagues. I've become part of an AP family. My job is national. I cover contact centres, courts, every part of the NPS. But for the last 15 months, I've been included in the NAPT calls. I've been included on AP Silver. My team that work out in the regions, I'm thinking hopefully work close with you. And we've managed to resolve those issues. And just to finish off, hopefully on a positive, this will make you chuckle. I had a bit of a faux pas this week. I've shared it with some of the colleagues on AP Silver last night. So face coverings is another area, the difference. What is a face mask? What's a face covering? Anyway, we've managed to get supply of face coverings, and I was asked, can you maybe try and get us a few more out in AP? Stocks are starting to run a bit low. So yep, done that job. Managed to place an order. Fantastic. I accidentally put another 7 on the numbers. So you were going to be getting 77,000 face coverings delivered, which is about pallets and pallets and pallets loads. But thanks to Dan Stretton, we've spotted my error. I'm hoping it's not the biggest one I've made or the only one, but certainly I've managed to avert you overloading. We might need more than one garage to get some supplies into, but yeah, so that's my faux pas. So thank you so much to everybody for your support on what has been a really difficult time, and I can only applaud the AP family, and please keep me in it. Thank you. Thanks, Bev.
Thank you, Andrea. That did make me laugh. That hilarious. It's almost a shame that the orders didn't go through. I would have loved to have seen those pictures. Right. If we break now and come back at 11:05, that's okay. I know it's only a very short break, but if we just all return for 11:05, that would be great. Thank you.
Thanks, Bev. Thanks.
hopefully everybody's on the way back.
I will come back for the I'm on a hostel training day at St Newydd, so I've jumped out to do this. I will come back in for the question and answer bit at the end, just in case there are any questions. So I'll be ducking in and out, I'm afraid.
Okay, Tina, thanks.
Tina, I'm just relieved to see you there in support. Thank you.
I'm just praying it works with the slides.
It will, it will.
Bev, is it myself and Tina next? I've just lost the agenda on the screen.
Let's have a look. Yes, it is, John.
Okay, thank you.
Come on, everybody, come back.
Bev, just
Hello?
to say, Caroline sent me a message. So, as we're running over, could we swap the well-being item with the recovery item that Dan and I are on? We'll just swap them over because Caroline has to make sure she's gone by 12, so we'll prioritise that because it's a really important input. So Dan and I can get squashed quite easily, but we ought to put Caroline on. So I'll remind you when we get to that point on the agenda, but we'll just swap them over.
Okay. Right, it's 7 minutes past. Shall we return to the agenda? So it will be John Holsley and Tina Bradford.
Okay, thank you, Bev.
I'm going to be sharing my screen with the slides for both of us, so I'll pull them up now.
Brilliant, thank you.
Thanks, Tina. Okay.
Whenever ready, John.
Yep. Well, my name's John Holsey. I'm an AP manager at Stonall Road in Walsall in the West Midlands. And it's been a real privilege to be invited today, really just to talk about our experiences of purposeful activities in APs at a time where we've really faced, as you'll be aware, a number of restrictions. I think the first thing I really wanted to acknowledge, although I'm speaking on behalf of Stonall Road, is that the purposeful activities and some of the initiatives I'm about to discuss, I'm really conscious happen in many APs across the region, across the country, and there's fantastic work that's been taking place. I guess I'm just in a position where I can talk about some of the things at Stonall Road and share with the group some of those positives. COVID's taken so much away from us and it's brought a lot of challenges, a lot of restrictions, and also brought about a different way of working. But I think in light of that, the key thing to remember is that we haven't and won't be defeated by that. And with a level of creativity, a level of planning and thought and consideration of our resident group, things can still happen. It doesn't mean things have to come to a stop and a standstill. So with that in mind, and being faced with a suspension of purposeful activities and a reduction of purposeful activities, quite rightly so, when faced with COVID restrictions, at Stonall Road, we kind of got our heads together to think about what we're going to do positively, and just being mindful of our resident experience as well. You know, guys coming out of prison already in a type of lockdown, into a community-based type of lockdown, being forced to remain in an area where they may have no connection because of government guidelines and restrictions, possibly only allowed out an hour a day just in terms of the government guidelines for essential travel or shopping or exercise. And so really, we were looking within the AP, what can we give back? What can we develop? What can we achieve? Let's focus on the can do rather than the can't do. And so therefore, whilst we looked at our purposeful activities, and we thought initially we would look at how we could support others. So what could we do that would support the local community at a time when we're faced with further lockdown? So the first slide you're seeing now is what we call the 2 Million Step Challenge, which was an initiative that was thought by a member of my team earlier this year, Amanda, back in January, as to how we could really support Acorns Children's Hospice, who work with children who have got life-limiting and life-threatening conditions. And so the idea, in discussion with the residents, and they played a significant part in this as well, was that we would do a virtual mountain climb, and along the way we would try to achieve 2 million steps within about a 2-month period. And so the 1 hour that the residents would have out to go and do their essential shopping, they would record the steps that they took. Equally, staff would record their steps, and it became quite competitive, and it brought a buzz about the place, and it all became quite motivational. And I really saw the impact upon that, both on the team, but the residents would talk to me about the sense of self-worth, how they felt really positive about making some reparation, being positive members of society by being able to contribute in this way. And so with the support of many people on this call and other LDUs, we were able to raise a total of £813 and cover over 3 million steps. And that was a joint resident and staff effort. I am ashamed to say I probably contributed something like 72. But the thought was there, and my heart and spirit was with all those that did it. And I won't take the credit for what everyone else did. But I think it was just a way of saying, you know, this is a way we can do something socially distanced. This is a way we can do something safe. We don't just have to give up on what we were delivering before. Let's look at what we can do different. Next slide, please, Tina, if you may. And so since COVID, we've also developed our chicken keeping project at Stonall Road. And again, when we talk about working with other APs, because the one thing that's really hit home for me over the last 12 months is the strength of the AP family that Andrea referred to. I've been in contact and liaison with people that I've never met before, and it really has made a difference to me personally and professionally. And that sense of togetherness, that spirit of we're in this together. And I mentioned that with the chicken keeping project because we were supported in this by an AP who had the knowledge and the experience of already having this in place, who were 40 miles away from us. And I guess you can't get more socially distanced than that. They offered fantastic support in enabling us to start this project. And as you'll see from the photos, you know, we started from nothing to being able to build a chicken coop, the chicken hut, to have some chickens, and the residents and staff have really bought into that. And the benefits that has brought to people's mental and physical health, their mental well-being, feedback from residents about how therapeutic they found it, how calming they found the project, the difference it kind of made to their experience of being at Stonall Road. So it's a project that has come despite of COVID. It's got longevity, it's there for all, and it's something we're really quite proud of. And just look at the photos there, make me smile, and it is true, keep calm and keep chickens. Next slide, please, Tina. And so the other project we were looking at, because as you'll see from these projects, these were about undertaking activities more outside, where we could socially distance, where we could maintain a safe space. And so that's where, given that we're a small AP, with just a few number of communal rooms. We were looking to utilise the space and the land that we'd got. And so we thought of some other projects as well that we'll continue with. Furniture making was being one, and that was just really an idea of, okay, let's gather some wooden pallets. They cost nothing, they're donated for free. A few nails, a saw and a hammer, and let's see what we can do. And there's one resident there in particular who's holding the saw with the furniture. He spoke of wanting to do this for some time, and so we provided him with the facilities to do so. And he actually made his own furniture to take with him to his move on address. So he made a bed frame, he made a chair, he had little funds to buy his own, and he was really quite thankful of that experience. But he taught us all so much from his own enthusiasm. He was able to show other residents his own skills, and they learnt from him as well. And then you'll see from the photos, we've started to develop an allotment project, and really in the infancy of that, but again, just bringing about some of the resident skills and really starting to think a bit more broadly and widely about what we could achieve. We've also got a picture of Montserrat there with a distraction pack. One thing we were really cognizant of was the impact of COVID on residents' well-being. A number of men who already arrived with mental health difficulties. And so it was about putting together a resource really that each and every resident and staff member could access at times of difficulty. There's mindfulness books there, there's puzzles, there's all sorts of things that we pulled together to say, you know, if you have to self-isolate, or you're struggling at the moment, you're in mental health crisis, here's just something else to help you get through those difficult times. And so for me, I just wanted to end really by saying, yeah, there's been a number of challenges, there's been a number of difficulties, and there could be a temptation to focus on that and focus on what we've lost and what has been taken away. But I think certainly in these times and going forward, I'd like to think that we're looking forward with a sense of hope, a sense of belief. And as I said, this isn't just about Stonall Road. This is what I've seen and heard nationally, and I have a confidence that there's so many positive things going out across the AP estate for the future. The last thing I just wanted to do before handing over to Tina was to thank Tina, really, because without Tina, you wouldn't have these slides and you would just have me speaking, and that wouldn't have been a great outcome. And Tina only met last week for the purpose of working on this, and with her creativity and genius, I've been able to show something a bit more visual. But equally, what it has allowed me to do, as I said previously, is work with another member of the AP family who is situated in Wales, and we're in the West Midlands, and it's a working relationship I think that we can involve to develop more purposeful activity going forward. Thanks, Tina.
Oh, Tina, I think you're on mute.
Tina, you're on mute.
There we go. Sorry about that. So I'm a PSO at St Newydd Approved Premises in North Wales. We've been in a really unique position during this pandemic. We are positioned between the Menai Straits and the Snowdonia mountain range, in a very rural area. So we've had probably an easier time than a lot of the inner city hostels. So when lockdown first came in and everything stopped, it had a massive impact on our residents. So it became a challenge really to think of what we could bring in that would allow our residents to get involved in things but keep them safe. So we started off with some indoor activities. You can see the 3D origami, which was a skill one of our resident group had, and it was an activity that they could do, one or two of them in one of our training rooms, or they could do individually. We started making motivational key rings that they were looking at online, and then they would print them out and would put them together. We did a lot of baking. And then jigsaws were also very popular, which were very kindly donated by staff and field team officers. Then one of the biggest impacts was the loss of our AP gym. We had to shut that down, and the residents were really impacted by that. So we started looking at what we could do in our garden. So we introduced Tai Chi and yoga and circuit training, so that residents could get involved in some form of exercise. We had our gardens growing anything and everything we could think of. We got the residents involved with the maintenance in the gardens. One of our staff members is a practicing falconer. He brought in some of his birds of prey and would do discussions with the residents about the birds, and they would be able to hold them, have them fly to them. That was a very interesting GRA to write. We also moved things like bingo, Welsh classes, reading groups, quiz nights. All of those moved into the back garden, to the point where actually our cook got involved as well. You can just see her in one of the pictures. Once restrictions started lifting, we started taking the residents on local walks, just to get them out of the building, get them feeling like they were doing something and getting away from here for a wee while. We also had some bike rides, and all of those activities were able to take part from the AP, with the residents walking from the AP with the staff. The big thing that happened, we are a small division in terms of we only have 4 APs in the whole of Wales. A lot of cross AP working was brought in. So as a group of PSOs in the 4 APs, we developed a programme which we've called the Life Skills course. It covers 6 different areas, all of which we were doing with residents, but we were doing them one-to-one or different courses in different APs, and we have a lot of movement between our 4 APs. So what we've done is we've come together, we've created this programme based on what we were already doing, and the 4 APs are now running this. So it doesn't matter which AP a resident goes to, they will have the opportunity to be part of this course. And it's 2 hours a session. The residents have been given a lot of feedback into what they like, what they don't like, what they feel we should add to it. So that's taken off. We've also developed an approved premises purposeful activities group. We meet once a month. We plan what we're going to be doing the following month. We share resources, we share ideas, and all of those are accessible to all of the AP staff. We've also started running a lot of inter-hostel competitions. So we had a Christmas tree decorating competition. We've currently got a hanging basket competition that's on the go at the moment. We have pinched John's idea of the walking challenge, and we were going to be running that across the 4 approved premises in July, August time. We've already got one running at the moment for staff, but we're moving that forward to run it with the residents in the same respect as John, some community returning to the giving back to the local community. So while the pandemic has been a horrific experience for everybody, we've had a lot of positives that have come out of it. So that's us. Thank you.
Thank you, Tina. Right, slight change to the agenda, if that is okay with everybody. I apologise, but we've got a really important section and Caroline needs to be gone by 12 o'clock. So if we can just bump the wellbeing section up the list. So hand over to Caroline Sheldon and Jackie Foden and Carrie Joy.
Jackie, I'm going to hand over to you. Hello, everybody.
Hello, thank you. Could we have the wellbeing slide up, please?
Yes, bear with me, Jackie. Hang on. My technical wizardry is not my most famous trait, so just give me 1 second.
My camera is
there.
likely to go
Promise
down.
you, I'm nearly there.
Okay. I'll start talking while you're finding the slide.
Hopefully got it there. There we go.
Just like many other people have said, one of the most amazing things I always find about the APs is the staff and their willingness to adapt to changes, and especially this pandemic. For me, the pandemic was great. I was redeployed to Lightfoot approved premises to cover a manager post for the pandemic, and I secured the job. I was successful in applying for the post, so I've been here since. I feel like I've spent most of the last 18 months saying, please, can you put your mask on about 100 times a day? And so I'm probably the most unpopular member of staff with the residents because it's one of the most important things we've done. We had quite a number of staff who had to isolate during the pandemic, which left us with vast numbers of shifts to fill. And I was just amazed at how many staff would come in and sometimes do an extra 50 hours extra work a week. And it was very important at the time to be aware of how staff were feeling about the pandemic, and they were coming in every day, putting themselves at risk, essentially. They were, obviously they had concerns that they were going to get COVID or that they might take it home to their families. And there was a lot of anxiety going on, as well as, all the amazing work they were doing. And so for me, one of the focus was not just on the well-being of the residents, but also on the staff, because I needed them to keep well and to keep willing to come in. And so I was researching about well-being and found this slide, the 5 ways to well-being, which is from the NHS. And it says that the 5 steps to being to good well-being is the first one is to connect. And very much so, as I said before, the AP is like a big family. You come to work and you're with your family, people you work with 12 hours a day. And so although they're there to talk for those 12 hours, it can be still very isolating. So one of the things I did, we had a project where we could have an amount of money of 4,000 to improve the AP in some way. So we have a back group room, which is often filled with junk and, often used as a store cupboard. And we bought a sofa and some chairs so that staff could actually take a bit of time out during the day, go out there, maybe have a coffee and just have a chat and just get away from the day-to-day slog of residents and COVID. That was really good because it just meant people could just have a bit of downtime. The other thing that's come out of COVID is that as a group of managers in the South East and Eastern, we've set up a monthly coffee morning where we all get together for an hour or so and talk about nothing to do with work. We talk about what we've done the previous weekend, and that's really helped us get involved together as a group of managers, which we otherwise wouldn't. The second step to wellbeing is about being active, and residents were allowed out once a day to go for a walk for an hour's activity as part of the COVID restrictions, and often I say the same thing to staff: if you need to get out, just go for a bit of a walk. Encouraging people to take time out of all their busy work to just take some time to do exercise for themselves. They couldn't go to gyms, but they could go out and walk, or just walk their dogs or go for a run. The other thing is about taking notice and just listening to others, remembering that life just wasn't always about work. We tried not to you know, give too many people too much extra work, so they still had time for their families, they still had time just to switch off from work a bit. And it was also about being mindful and just being aware of, you know, I could tell some days when staff were really anxious and you know, sort of get them in for a bit of a chat, remind them about PAM Assist, and just being aware of how they were feeling about, you know, it was okay to be anxious, it was okay to be worried about your family, and just okay to sit down and talk to each other about, you know, their concerns. Another step to wellbeing is about keep learning, and you know, we were trying to find things to do for the residents as well, to keep them active when we couldn't do group work, but also for staff. There was a number of things that come up through the learning. There was some free websites where people could get free online learning, so you know, encouraging staff to maybe learn another skill that again was completely nothing to do with work. And we had residents who could crochet, or who could knit, or who were really good at tapestry, and we would ask them to do a little session in a small group, and encourage them to learn new things as well. And that was really good for the residents, because it allowed them to connect more. They were, although they still had to self-isolate, or they were having to maintain their distance, they were still able to communicate and connect with each other. And the last thing about wellbeing is about giving, and that might not just be about volunteering or you know, donating to charities, but also about just saying something nice to somebody, or taking the time to listen to somebody. And it was very it would have been very easy for people to be stressed and get a bit irritated with other member of staff or with residents, but it was really important that we would have you know, maybe a coffee morning, or we would have a bit of time out just to say nice things to each other. And really, I made a really big part of supervision to thank everybody for their hard work, and to say, you know, what a great job you're all doing, and I really do appreciate all the extra hard work. But it was also equally as important to keep in touch with those staff that weren't able to be at work, whether it was because of childcare or because of shielding for a partner, and still saying to them, you know, it's okay, don't feel guilty that you're not here, you know, you still need to look after your family, your children. And so this has become quite embedded in our AP now, that, and we had obviously I would signpost them to PAM Assist if they felt they needed to talk to somebody outside of work. And thank you, Joe, that's just made me laugh. And also that the HMPPS posters that, you know, the steps to unwind before going home at night. And somebody's actually written on the bottom of one of them, hug it out, now that we're out of full restrictions. And I really do think that that's been a really important part of COVID. For me, COVID's been a great thing, because I've got a new job, I'm no longer working at home, and I've been out every day since. And I think overall the staff have really been appreciative of it, and we're continuing to keep going with that as we come out of restrictions. Thank you.
Thanks, Jackie. I'm Kerry Joy, a forensic psychologist and the PIPE clinical lead at Fleming House approved premises. And I want to follow on from what Jackie's saying about the importance of well-being. It's so important that we do look after absolutely everybody. So you'll see from the slides that we've put up is a picture of the human brain, and what I'm hoping to do today is really give you a bit of a theoretical understanding about exactly what has happened to us over the last 12 months. Listening to everybody talking this morning, everyone's experienced such different things and overcome challenges, and I think it's good for us to understand how that's happened. So the brain that you can see on the slide is split into 3 different areas. And the largest area is devoted to what we call our kind of logical and abstract thinking. That's where all the key stuff happens. The second part is known as the limbic system, and this is where we process the emotions. It's the centre for what goes on. And finally, it's quite a small bit, but it's the reptilian brain, and that's the area where we learn about the sort of survival. That's our natural instincts. And the important thing to understand is that our brains are wired to fear uncertainty. So when something like the corona pandemic strikes across the world, it leads us into sort of what Boris famously says, unprecedented times. And this, some could argue, is the biggest example of uncertainty that our generation have faced on a global scale, and this has been the biggest threat to our brains so far. So the amygdala, which is the part of the limbic system, you can see the bits in yellow on the brain. This is our ring doorbell. It's our threat and radar system, and this is always scanning what's going on around us for signs of danger, and that's what will trigger the fight or flight that you might have heard of before. So that's going to be different in everybody. We're all going to have different levels, but it's something that's on high alert a lot of the time when we've got uncertainty around us. And those with a low tolerance for uncertainty are more likely to experience some emotional distress. And that in turn affects our ability to use our logical brain, the big part that you can see there. The impact of this is that we then get an increase in anxiety and other mental health conditions. And the bit that we didn't talk about was obviously the reptilian brain. And this is really the explanation as to why the country went into mass purchase around emptying supermarket shelves and stocking up on toilet roll. It was our natural instinct around survival. So the COVID outbreak caused so much uncertainty that it became intolerable for so many people. It saw the biggest period of imposed isolation and the greatest levels of illness and suffering. Humans are social animals, and it helps with our survival to be around others. In March 2020, our brains began to experience a level of uncertainty, which inevitably led to people experiencing a range of emotions, but particularly stress and anxiety coupled with isolation. This wasn't exclusive to one area of their lives, and this is the bit that's so important. It was evident at work, within the family life, the social settings. People experienced the difficulties and uncertainty with finances, their child's education, and of course health of themselves, but also their loved ones. The more certainty we have, the better our brains feel they can plan to deal with situations. So we don't need perfect certainty or full control, but what we do need is the perception that we have the control, so that we can feel more settled to deal with things. And to manage feelings, people dealt with things in really different ways, and this has come up listening to people this morning. So some people working from home, turning on a laptop and mobile phone and never stepping away from it for fear of something happening. Somebody was describing kind of feeling guilty locking off at 6 o'clock at night. There have been patterns of behaviour that we've seen where people responding to emails quickly, making snap decisions to new situations. These were all strategies to try and gain some control. Others attended the workplace, working over and above their hours. The more hours they were in, the more control they felt about what was going on. And this was because they were there as things slowly evolved, rather than coming into something new, which would have prompted and triggered that uncertainty in the brain. Alternatively, some people manage this unknown by retracting and becoming isolated and actually withdrawing from society. The withdrawal acted as a form of control and protection of the self. Whichever category individuals fell into, it was a way of trying to have more certainty for the brain, which in turn made us feel safer. So how do we move away from this way of working to work in a way that encompasses change but also provides relaxation, normality and certainty? Certainty will help us switch off and relax. At an individual pace, this has affected everybody differently. So as we're not born with resilience and the flexibility to change, this is why we experience such high levels of stress and anxiety at a time of uncertainty. So we've actually got to train our brains. Training our brains helps develop neuroplasticity, which in turn helps us to become more of an automatic way of thinking. So the more familiar we've become with COVID and the new ways of working, it's developed more certainty, which means that we've got a better approach to now being able to relax. But I want to finish by thinking about ways in which that we can help ourselves. So to help our brains, we need to take control of what we can in an uncertain world, however small, because this reduces the balance of uncertainty in our lives. So we can do this by having structure and routine. Things become more predictable, and this frees up space in the mind to manage the uncertainty. We know that our ability to make decisions is impacted on when we're stressed or anxious. So don't try to do this without going back to basics. Try to establish what the facts are, think about what the policy might say, what the procedures we should be following. This strategy allows for structure to be put in place and stimulates thinking. Having goals is important. So walking our millions of miles is very good. But some of our life goals and our work goals might have changed because of the impact of COVID. So we might need to rethink some of those, but achieving small goals can promote a sense of achievement and control in our lives. It's important to be kind to ourselves and reward ourselves for our achievements. Going back to the brain, the feel-good neurotransmitter dopamine is released in anticipation and receipt of a reward. Moving the body also helps moving the mind. And this can be a good distraction, which in turn then helps us to focus. It also releases the feel-good endorphins and dopamine, which will help you feel good. And finally, it's important to be around others. The brain contemplating its loneliness is like the brain worrying. Being around others when we are stressed can release oxytocin, which helps us want to reach out and be around others. So for some people, actually coming into work is incredibly important. And of course, we mustn't ignore some of those activities like yoga and mindfulness, which are also extremely helpful for us. Okay, so that is my presentation around sort of the theoretical approach to wellbeing, and I'm now going to hand over to Caroline to talk to you in a bit more detail about the wellbeing.
God, it's so interesting. So many areas of the brain, so many ways in which we as human beings function. I'm surprised that actually my brain is doing all those things and I blink and it all happens and it magically just kind of does it for me. Impressive human beings as we are, as humans. And I want to start with the place of we are human beings. We have faced this pandemic together. And me as a human being, I'm Caroline Sheldon. My human being role within the MOJ is that of clinical lead for employee psychological services. And within my role, really what I've looked at, I joined during the pandemic. So I've experienced kind of that kind of the separation. I think my brain's been through several processes that you've discussed there. In and above all of it, though, I think all of us have been through this process in one way or another. And individually, we've all experienced this process in many different ways. We have many different coping strategies that come out of this. We have many different individual ways of managing ourselves and our initial behavioural responses to certain situations. Sometimes, and I'll put my hand in the air, mine has been also, I've noticed just an intense cravings for sugars. And of course, my brain is going, and I know that actually internally that it's all interlinked. And all of those experiences that you will have had are absolutely, and I don't use this word very often, but they are central to you. They are normal. They are yours. It doesn't mean that you're abnormal if no one else around you is not experiencing them. We in our own well-being, our own mental health, physical health, spiritual health, however we want to kind of put the banners on this, our own human being of ourself is going to experience also coming out of what has been the pandemic in a very different way as well. So there's an adjustment phase that we're all entering into, and that will also throw up more challenges for all those areas of the brain that you've mentioned previously. And I'm aware that when we are in the call today, we've spoken very much about family and the ethos of family and how everyone is kind of pulled together as a family. And something I want to put in now is it's absolutely okay that you might want a bit of distance from your family. You might want a little bit of a break from family, and I would strongly encourage everybody who's not or may not have taken annual leave over the periods of lockdown and try and get those breaks in. Like all of us, as much as we do crave kind of human interaction and it can be really helpful for us, actually on the back of that is it can increase kind of like our stress zones. It can increase all of those interpersonal conversations that we have every day. And sometimes they can be anxiety filled because we're around a time of change. So sometimes just hitting the pause button, taking a break away from the working environment, especially that on social media, on any of our internal chats, just having a pause is really helpful and healthy for us. So within the areas that I'm kind of thinking of and the lines I'm going down here is something we want to be preventative about is, yes, everyone has worked incredibly hard through the pandemic, and Beverly, your opening statement really did kind of link in to the ethos and also the wonderful comments that I've seen in the chat. But something I'm very conscious of is this elusive term that is floating around at the moment, and that's burnout and trauma. And they're two quite heavily weighted phrases. Burnout can mean something very different for the person sat next to you, to the person down the corridor, to how you're experiencing burnout. And there are many different variants of burnout. So we've got emotional burnout, we've got physical burnout, we've got compassion fatigue. They're all underneath the banner of burnout. But in recent documentation, and I will attach all of this in the chat, is also a state of languishing. So I don't know if anyone's come across this phrase yet. It's the feeling of, very professionally, meh. There it is. That's exactly what it is. Meh. Like, we've experienced so much. Our brains have absorbed so much over the past, well, almost coming to 18 months, I think, for some of us, that actually it's okay for us to just go, ugh, and not absorb all of that information. Bits will come over a period of time. And I think that's what I want to kind of really emphasize today, is that really is about our survival in the here and now. And it comes back to that part of our brain of looking at the kind of the consistencies, and survival is a consistency. It may not be the consistency that we're used to at the high levels of thriving that we're used to putting out, but actually survival is utterly acceptable. It is, and I want to come back to kind of Joanne's phrase of good enough. Survival is good enough. It is good enough for you as a human being. It is good enough for those who are around you. And actually, if everyone together is being and feeling that sense of good enough and collaborates together, then anxiety in and of itself in a group world may just kind of come down a little bit. Perhaps that's my blue sky wishful thinking. However, we are all capable of feeling meh and talking about meh, or if you want to be more professional, languishing. But as human beings, something that I would say is if you wanted to reach out to any resources that are available for you to have a reflection space as well, there is the opportunity for reflective sessions. There is the opportunity to connect, yes, with PAM Assist if you'd like to, if you're experiencing anything over a longer period of time as we go through an organisational and environmental change in the world that we're in, inside and outside of work. Then there are some accesses I'm going to put in the chat. And something that I'd invite individuals to look at also is the civil servant, the Charity for Civil Servants has put out a really good web page about burnout. So if anyone has any kind of queries or questions for themselves about what the definition of these phrases that are being thrown around at the moment, it could be really beneficial. So I've popped those in the chat also. But really, from me to you, this is about whatever it is that you're doing at the moment, whether it is not necessarily getting up and being very physical and doing the couch to 5K, and you're still reaching for the cookie jar because your brain is craving for sugar. Do you know what? Absolutely, this is all part of being a human being, and you will, over a period of time, if we talk about it and we reflect on it and we're open about it, our brains will simmer down a little bit. Don't hold it in, I think is one thing I would say, is share it. And absolutely, whoever wrote on that poster, genius, hug it out. Wonderful. But thank you very much for having me here today. It's been an absolute privilege to hear of the information that's here.
Love that, Caroline. Thank you so much. Right, so I know we've run over time, but people stay with us. There are some other presentations coming up that are worth waiting for. Okay, so we're going back now to Petra Chapman Gibbs, if that's okay.
Hi, good morning everyone. I'm Petra Chapman Gibbs and I'm the AP manager at Southview Pipe in York. So I'm going to speak for a few minutes about our experience of working in a pipe in a pandemic, and then I'm going to hand over to Leanne, who will introduce herself then. One of the things that's really paramount in a pipe, a psychologically informed planned environment, is about working relationally. And what we found, which all of you did as well in APs, was that working behind screens, wearing masks and RWs sort of retreating into offices brought up many barriers and triggers to working relationally, and also many of the key workers working at home. Being planned and being thoughtful is a very large part of what we do, and having to very quickly review and change what we did and put in restrictions at such speed made residents feel very anxious, very uncertain from the staff team as well, and made the pipe quite an uncontained environment. As other people have said as well today, that we were encouraged to move residents on quicker to reduce our capacity really, and pipe residents normally stay up to around 6 months, and managing transitions in a thoughtful way is kind of one of our focuses. So residents were like arriving from prison and then not quite given enough support to adjust really about being out, and then being asked to move on quicker than normally would be anticipated, which didn't give them enough time to get their heads around things, and also perhaps moving on to places that they just weren't ready to be there. Another aspect of the pipes are that they tend to thrive on operating more flexibly and with a certain amount of autonomy. However, working under a command and control structure, as in the gold, silver, bronze, did not allow for consideration of individual unit, individual need, any protective factors, or even an ability for us to challenge the command structure. Really interesting just to hear about what staff well-being and reflection. Pipes have clinical group supervision weekly. This went very quickly onto Microsoft Teams, so it still happened. However, there was an emotional and physical distance put in place straight away, which, you know, possibly people were more distracted and it was less authentic. We have more staff in a pipe, and that's about supporting more complex residents that we have. Key workers and clinical staff were having to work at home, and this put more pressure on the RW teams and AP manager. That's probably something that a lot of APs have experienced as well. We found it quite difficult to hold consistent boundaries. Somebody's already said about repeatedly asking people to wear masks, and I guess with residents who have, say, personality disorder traits, they're practiced at pushing boundaries, especially when struggling. And so it was difficult for the whole staff team to apply the government restrictions quickly. Although we understood why some residents were breaching the COVID restrictions, we felt that the preservation of life message meant that we had to urgently make them adhere. So we used our improvement planning process to work through, say, deselection of residents or holding people to account. This wasn't how the improvement plan process was intended originally. However, it did work to use that, and it did allow for open discussions around motivating residents to comply and discuss why people might be struggling, so to get behind the function of what was happening. The partnership working is really key to PIPE. That's the partnership between the NHS and the NPS, and that's paramount to its working. But what we found was the two organisations had different EDMs, so were getting pulled in different directions, and there was a lot of tensions in the beginning about PPE. Lastly, being psychologically informed helps us to make decisions using the boundary seesaw model. But with government restrictions, EDMs forcing us to make more punitive decisions about the needs of the individuals that they were getting lost, perhaps staff were becoming less tolerant, more frustrated, and perhaps we weren't knowing our residents as well because we weren't doing as much with them, and we were perhaps afraid and forced to think in black or white, and kind of thinks more flexibly. And I think that the boundary seesaw model was sort of lost in a more punitive environment. So I'm going to hand over now to Leanne, who will talk a bit more about that.
Thanks, Petra. So I'm Leanne Myers. I'm the clinical lead of Holbeck House PIPE AP, and I'm just going to follow on what Petra's been saying. I guess Petra's outlined some of the stresses on the ability to function as a PIPE AP. And the dilemma really that I'm sure a lot of you will share as well is that how do we maintain psychological safety for our staff and residents when COVID has impacted on the ability to feel safe? As Petra said, the impact of being in command and control mode, it can feel really disempowering, and as others have talked about, it's a picture really of low morale and teams who are under enormous stress, but less power and more uncertainty about their role and their purpose. So it can mean that people are operating from a threat position in survival mode, and they can feel stuck. And this links into what Kerry was talking about in terms of the three brains and what's happening to us as human beings. So how do we support the team and be a PIPE during the pandemic? So we had two strands that we were focusing on, so roughly two strands. One was helping the staff team feel safe. It's about communicating compassion and thinking about well-being with the team, and much of what's been outlined in the well-being talks before us is thinking about what the team need to feel safe themselves. Secondly, it was about empowering staff to understand and work with residents. So it was more about valuing what staff are already doing to help them feel valued and that they have a purpose. So recognising that there is fantastic relational work that can be done even in a pandemic. So I'm going to briefly talk through just one aspect of that second strand. So and this is mainly around the time when we weren't able to offer any groups or one-to-one work. So it's about supporting staff to value the subtle relational ways they can have an impact and make explicit the nuanced approach to understanding relational interventions. So the aim really is in validating what staff are already doing, even from a physical distance, and emphasising that staff are good enough and making explicit that what they don't think twice about doing are important interventions. So firstly, the task is, how do you connect psychologically to residents when we're distanced? And it's about trying to understand what residents might be going through, what they might experience ordinarily, but what might be exacerbated during the pandemic when people are coming out of prison and they're having more restrictions put on them. So they're in a flight and fight survival mode. They're feeling anxious, afraid, or angry. But what's happening and what don't we see? So it's there might be release of stress hormones, a heartbeat spike, digestion slowing down as the blood rushes to muscles, and the body gets ready to be in survival mode. And people might experience uncomfortable feelings in their body. So making that explicit, that link between those experiences and what we see in behaviour, and thinking about behaviour as a way of communicating some underlying need. Knowing why the residents might be doing the things that they're doing can help maintain compassion. Well, it can be hard to sustain empathy in the situation where staff are feeling low tolerance and they're struggling themselves. So some of the things we wanted to make explicit is a resident withdrawing, so locking himself in his room because it might be too much to be around people. Is that a way of managing emotions and his internal discomfort? Comforting behaviours, it could be drug use, it could be eating unhealthy food, it could be doing things that aren't, ordinarily healthy. Coping behaviours to feel more in control, like self-harm or care eliciting behaviour. So more demands on staff. It might be as simple as asking for small things repeatedly that can be quite confusing for staff. So as I said, we wanted to empower staff, and it's what can we do, and actually more so what do we do. And that was important in helping everybody value their interactions, no matter how small or physically distant. So the main focus was on the nuances of relational interaction. How can we help establish safety and help our residents come out of survival-driven behaviours, where we can. Noticing and acknowledging what residents are experiencing can limit harmful behaviours. So just taking a moment to listen with empathy to what a resident's experiencing can make him feel less alone and less afraid, even if what he's showing doesn't look like fear. It's that feeling of being connected that has been talked about today and understood by another person can help engage the social engagement system and help somebody feel safe. And it might not seem like anything, so we were having conversations with staff to see that those little conversations that are had when giving somebody their meds or helping out at tea time are all really important interventions. Demonstrating trustworthiness across the whole AP community is that it happens at every interaction and it's a community effort. So we emphasise the staff should be themselves, not to think about the words that they use, so it's not evasive language, and everything that that demonstrates feeling cared for at a time when support is less, we're less able to do the things that we were able to do before. Being consistent and predictable can help people feel safe, and we talked about people being clear and concrete. So if somebody was in a meeting, rather than saying I'll be 2 minutes or I'll be with you in a minute, being really clear that it might be 10 minutes, it might be half an hour before they can see what the resident needs. And recording it, what we noticed was that people would say that there was nothing going on, and largely there wasn't, but there was a lot going on relationally that could be helped, that could be captured and thought about, and help staff feel like they're doing a good job. And whatever the behaviour, whether with staff or with residents, it was about really recognising that none of us are managing perfectly, and to have a sense of compassion in the community, in the PIPE community, to acknowledge we're all doing the best that we can do at the moment. So hopefully I haven't gone too over. I didn't look at the time, but thank you all.
Thank you, Leanne. So, bear with me, just look at my agenda. Up next, we have Jerry Byrne-Thompson.
Morning, everybody. So last but not least, I think, we're going to give you a whistle-stop tour through how we managed COVID in the Northwest. So just for some context, we've got 15 APs in the Northwest, and we had outbreaks at about 10 of them. So what you're going to hear is, as I say, a whistle-stop tour through. There is a music quiz. So that was interesting earlier on from Mike, his comments. So if you listen out, and then at the end of the presentation, those that can identify all the songs, you put those in the chat bar, we'll pick one out and we'll send you a special Northwest prize. And because equality and diversity is so important to us, you will have a greeting from Vicky in a minute, which is in British Sign Language. And then we also have one of our managers who's going to talk around COVID and the impact on the Black, Asian and ethnic minority colleagues as well. So that's really important, embedded through our presentation, as well as you'll hear a snippet from a podcast from a resident. So we feel that we've got a really good, interesting presentation for you. So without further ado, I will now hand you over to Tim, who first it'll be Vicky giving us the greeting, and then Tim, who will talk us through one of the very first outbreaks that we had in Cheshire.
Hello.
Welcome, North West presentation.
Okay, over to you, Tim.
Hi everybody, so my name's Tim Thorne. I'm the manager of Bunbury House approved premises in Ellesmere Port. I've been here for 3 years, and what I hope is about 2/3 of my first ever pandemic. As Jerry said, I'm going to talk a little bit about what it's like being one of the first APs to have residents and team members test positive for COVID. I have to say it's been great to hear from so many speakers today, and I am slightly worried that I'm not going to be able to keep up the same standard. So to make up for a drop in quality, I'll at least try and be quick. My memories of the start of the pandemic are probably the same as everybody else's. We heard about it on the news and we hoped it was being over-reported. We started to get texts from friends and family, and we hoped it would pass us by. Then, as everyone else did, we started implementing all the safety planning that was being brought in. We reduced the number of staff in the building, we started moving people on, we started holding meetings outside and purposeful activities outside, and we all remember being really thankful for the good weather. We also started to get used to using Teams for meetings and really enjoying being smug when someone forgot to unmute themselves. Then we had a positive case. We isolated the resident. We followed the protocol that was laid out at the time. The team donned the PPE, delivered meds and food and care and activities as best we could. It was clear that this caused a huge amount of stress for the team here, and yet they continued to come to work to provide care for people in a way that it was just inspiring. I think the most sobering moment for us as a team was a young man we looked after here. He'd been in prison for about 4 years and had clearly spent most of that time eating protein and going to the gym. We were hearing at the time the information was that being unhealthy was a factor, but he could run marathons and he was taken really ill and was eventually hospitalised. But thankfully, he recovered and finished his residency here, but it was really, really hard. To give a personal perspective, the worst moment for me was sitting in a field with both of my kids, because childcare was non-existent, on an impromptu Teams call with Public Health England and Jerry. I've got the dog trying to eat a tennis ball, and we were desperately trying to get the Public Health England not to lock us down. This was a time when we didn't know how far things were going to go, and there was talk of 2 staff members on shift being asked to stay here for 10 days and totally locked down with the residents. We argued this to the hilt, thinking that no team member that would ever agree to do this. But then when I talked to them later and discussed this as a possibility, several of them agreed that they would have done it, which again shows an amazing commitment to the work that we do. There was also took offences and the army being drafted in and all these really terrifying things that we were sort of worried we were living in some sort of post-apocalyptic film. And then we had 2 staff test positive, but I'll leave that for them to talk about. It does feel like now there is a glimmer of hope on the horizon. I think only one person's mentioned variants today, which is good. It feels like now is a good time to start reflecting back on what's happened and how we dealt with the trauma of it, and to hope that we really are over the worst of it. So I'm going to hand over to a recording now from Tracy, who is a RSW here at Bunbury, who contracted COVID in the first round.
We're all advised to get a test in. And I took mine home with me with a plan of doing it on the Sunday morning at a certain time in the morning. I'd worked on the Friday morning after cover being needed. At this point, I would say I'd felt like I was suffering from hay fever. This isn't unusual for me if the pollen's high. Also, I was struggling with the temperature of the weather and had light sensitivity. So I was glad to be in the shaded office at Bunbury. The following day, I joined some friends to have a picnic locally and go kayaking. It was a sunny day and we had a nice time. I was feeling shivery but didn't fancy going for a swim in the quarry and took myself home around tea time. I felt tired and settled down for an early night. I felt a little agitated and couldn't get warm. I was bunged up like a head coal, and late into the night I was struggling to rest. I decided to try some Vicks under my nose, and it was then I realised I couldn't smell it. It was a strange experience. I've got a nose like a bloodhound normally, and then I started thinking I might have the COVID.
So that was Tracy, one of the RSWs here. So once we'd recovered and we'd been through our, making sure the place stayed staffed, We then started to see other APs starting to have positive tests, and it fell to the team here to keep other APs staffed. The other AP in Cheshire is Linden Bank in Sandbach, and following closely from us, they started to have team members test positive, and they were at real risk of closure if they couldn't fill the shifts. It was a Sunday afternoon when things started to fall apart, and we basically had to cover shift after shift after shift in order to keep Linden going. Despite the risks the team here about working across sites, they put their worries aside and undertook shifts at Linden Bank, and we all managed to stay open. We still wonder now what would have happened if we'd have had outbreaks at the same time, and it was for this reason and about a million other things at the time that led to the Bunbury team being nominated for North West Team of the Year. Although, to be fair, I mean, they did win, but to be fair, I think that could have gone to any team in the middle of this pandemic. So that's everything for me, and thanks for listening.
Okay, so that was the first song. So I'll just quickly skate through this. So at the beginning, as everybody said, we didn't have any tests, and it was really important to us to build that relationship with both the CCGs and Public Health England. But what we weren't prepared for at the very beginning was the fact that, you know, when they gave us tests, when we eventually managed to persuade them, we were unable to get them tested because we didn't have a care home number. But we overcame that, and then we had the infection control visits. So anybody that's been deemed an outbreak in the Northwest, we had the local authority visit, and they were very concerned about the level of cleanliness, the state of the buildings. So we had to just listen to that about being questioned very closely around, you don't have cleaners at weekends, what kind of cleaning regime have you got in place, what materials are you using, etc., and then being declared an outbreak, and then them saying to us at some of the stages, well, you're going to have to redirect residents away. So what we did, though, is we built up very close working relationships. We devised the COVID toolkit, which I think is in its 7th iteration now, so that we didn't have to keep starting from ground zero about who to contact, what to do. I think I had the ICC website on my speed dial, and regular conversations with Public Health England, so much so that we were on first names terms, which was great. We had fantastic help and support by Michael Venturous and the Offender Health team, as well as Kate McCann. And I probably should have said in about FM there as well, because everybody really worked together. That was a real kind of spirit of coming together. And that really helped us in the meetings with Public Health England. And we were able to quote all the SOPs and the safe working practices. So that really convinced Public Health England that there were so many good practices in place that, you know, that's, I'm sure, what helped us not having to close down. And then, as you know, more cleaning came in place. And we then also were working very closely with the prisons about asking very detailed questions about which wings prisoners were on before they came to the AP and if they'd been in contact with people. And as I say, we crossed our fingers and kept watching the local infection rates. But at the beginning, it was quite a worrying time. So here's the clue for the second song. Okay, so I'm now going to hand you over to Amanda, who's going to talk to you about the largest outbreak that I think we've had in the APs, which was at Howarth House in Blackburn. So at one stage, we had 15 residents self-isolating and 8 members of staff off with COVID. Amanda.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm the manager of Haworth House in Blackburn. In the latter end of 2020, Blackburn was identified as a high-risk COVID area. We were well aware of this and really concerned. We were cautious and started testing residents weekly. I've been in post at Haworth House 8 months, and boy, what an 8 months it's been. However, the first week in January, we suddenly discovered ourselves in a position where we had 15 residents self-isolating and 8 staff tested positive. I genuinely thought we'd have to close the AP, but due to committed staff, we managed to get through. I don't think anyone can imagine how worrying and anxiety-inducing this was for me, staff, residents, managers, families of residents and staff as well. The slide that you can all see reflects some of my thoughts during this period. There was hundreds, as I'm sure you can imagine, and some of them I would not be able to share in this forum for fear of being sacked. We were identified as the largest outbreak site in approved premises. That's not something good to be famous for. In total, we had 28 positive cases with staff and residents over a 2-month period. We worked really closely with Public Health England and Blackburn Council Infection Control, forging what I can only describe as amazing relationships that are still ongoing today. We still have regular email contact, and this is one of the positives. The above resulted in me devising a COVID checklist, required equipment, diversity needs list of the residents in isolation, and this has all been added to the toolkit. I can say we are blessed as we didn't have any deaths. We had 2 residents over 80 and staff and residents in the high risk group. Some residents were hospitalised, but eventually recovered. Without the most fantastic team, colleagues and managers, I do not know if I would ever have got through this really difficult time. And thanks to them, I remain sane and calm most of the time, although I'm sure Jerry would tell you otherwise at some points. I hope that this is the last ever major outbreak anywhere in the AP division, and we are in denial about the new variants and not allowed to speak about them. I'd like to say the next clip is Emily, an RW minimum hours at Haworth, who without her fantastic support, we wouldn't have remained open. And then there's a paragraph of a letter that a resident sent to us about being in isolation at Howard House. And then following is a podcast from an ex-resident. Thank you.
If it wasn't for my colleagues, I think, you know, we would have all really struggled to get through it. We had 75% of the staff off. I think it was about 4 or 5 of us that were just kind of rotating through the shifts, and we all kind of did it without complaint. I remember, you know, just being so anxious and so worried at that time, and, you know, my colleagues were a real source of strength and support, and, you know, we all just kind of pitched in and got through it. You know, overnight our jobs were turned from kind of supervising these residents to kind of being their full-time nurses, you know, and it was a worrying time. We were looking after some men who actually were quite ill with the virus, and we had a lot of concerns about them. But every step of the way we were supported by management. I think we called at some point, and I'm sure we called nearly enough every out of hours manager, and at every point they did everything they can to support whatever situation arose, whether that be a resident, you know, wouldn't stay in their bedroom, or we got a resident that was really quite ill and we had to send to hospital. Anything we rang them with, they would support us 100%. So I'd like to say thank you for that. I think really concerning and worrying time. It was a massive comfort to know that we had the full support at all times. To be honest, I don't think there's much more to add. I could go into the great depths of those few weeks, but I think it really comes down to the staff and the support that we kind of offered each other at that time. All I can really say is that I hope that was the last one. and I hope that this year is much better than last.
As Amanda has said, so this is a letter from a resident, so we can just skate over that in the interest of time, but he was just thanking all the staff for helping him so much during COVID. And the next one you're going to hear is a very short podcast from a resident just explaining what it was like at Merseybank.
I couldn't be around anyone because I've been isolating for that room for so long. I felt antisocial. So I've come out, I've gone out, made it through. I've been speaking to a few other residents and that, and then the staff come out and then they made me feel at ease. But in that period where I was isolated, they were phoning me, they were checking up on me, they were making sure that if I needed anything or I wanted anything, anything that I needed or all my needs were met.
What happened with food then in COVID times? Like when you were isolating, what happened with your meals?
The staff had phoned me to see if I wanted anything, and then if I wanted something, they'd bring it to my door, they'd knock on the door, tell me that it was there, and then that was between 12 and 2. I'd get me dinner, and then between 4:30 and 5:30, they'd bring me tea every day.
Okay, and as said at the beginning, this is our last one from Simon, who's a manager at Place.
Second lockdown, heading towards our third lockdown, and there was a lot of talk about the impact my skin color would have on my ability to fight COVID should I contract it, because I have dark skin and from Afro-Caribbean descent. Therefore, vitamin D levels were quite low, so therefore that was something I was mindful of coming out of my home, working from home a lot, coming to an environment like this, where COVID could be coming through the door at any point. Thankfully, through good hygiene, through good preparation, through doing the right things at the right time, I've been able to scathe off COVID, and it hasn't been an issue. And I've been able to get on with the job at hand, albeit at a very difficult and strange time within the AP division. I do enjoy it. I do enjoy the challenge. I am proud to be Black and I'm proud to be a manager. But most of all, I'm just happy to do the job which I've wanted to do for so long. So I hope you enjoyed listening to me. Thanks for listening. This video was meant to be a minute, but I do like to talk. So thank you for listening.
And although this is from Todmorden, which is in Yorkshire, people will know I don't live too far from Todmorden, so I thought I would borrow this. So as you've heard, so that's a whistle-stop tour through how we managed COVID in the 15 APs in the Northwest, and we'll finish with one song, but I just wanted to say that because of our relationship with Public Health England, and the CCGs, we were able to get vaccines back in March, and most of our staff have taken up that opportunity. So it really just shows the importance of partnership working. Thank you. And if you can put after you've heard the last song, you can put them all in the chat bar and then we'll pick some out and prizes will be sent. Thank you. Thank you.
Can only get better. Can only get, take it on from me, you know. I know that things can only get better.
Thank you, Jerry and the team. Wow. Okay, so thank you everybody that's still with us. Obviously, we've gone massively over. I think, Victoria, we're going to ask for people to send in any questions.
Yeah, I think we felt, I mean, things have overrun quite a lot, but we thought it was so moving really and inspirational hearing everyone's stories. We didn't want to curtail them, and so what we thought we'd do is deal with the Q&A stuff by correspondence. So if people had a question that they were intending to ask this morning of the panel, put it in the chat bar or email me directly. I'm Victoria Jeffries. I'll put my email in the chat, and we'll put together a question and answer document that we'll share with everyone via Simon Cornelius's comms team. The other bit that Dan Monk from Southwest South Central and I were due to present on was just about lessons learned, things that we've changed during the pandemic that we would want to keep and things that we would want to lose, and we were interested to get your input and your views on those things. So for example, thinking about some of the alterations we made, we've done remote key working, introduced that, and I don't think it's probably something we would want to keep because key working is so much about relationships. But other innovations that we've made, I mean, people have referred to technology, about feeling closer to colleagues, we may want to keep. And so if people have a view on some of those things, put them in the chat bar and we'll collate those as well. That was what we were going to present on, but I think it was more important we heard these fantastic presentations. So we will obviously take account of your questions. There were some pre-submitted ones as well, which we had responses to, but both Joe Oliver and Simon Cornelius have had to leave because we've overrun. So if people are happy, we'll deal with it that way, and we'll make sure we respond to your questions and circulate them. I hope that's all right. But can I just say, I've been blown away by the contributions we've had today. They've been really inspirational and uplifting. So very touched. I mean, I helped put together the agenda, but I had no idea what the actual detail of what people were going to present on was, and it's just been really awesome. So my thanks to everyone. Anyway, and Beverly, you've done a brilliant job comparing, absolutely brilliant. So we'll hand back to you to close, but thank you so much. Been lovely to see everyone's faces and hear your voices.
Thank you all. Thank you, Victoria, for inviting me to be part of this. And I mean, for me, I just think what we've been through, what we, all together, and one of the themes from today is AP family. So I'll take that with me into work this afternoon. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thank you. Thanks for staying with us, everyone. Bye.